So, the past week or so, I've been struggling mentally, struggling emotionally, struggling in terms of mood, in terms of thinking about my place in this world and what it is I'm doing. So, it's basically been a huge overload. So, just keep that in mind as a background. Um, so I'm going to tell a story about something that happened today. So, I was inside my apartment, um, and I've gotten in this habit of shutting the blinds and turning off all electronic items, and just like finding a way to just like meditate and observe my thoughts. And so I've been doing that, and I've been doing this because I've just had an overload lately, mentally as well as in terms of the stimuli from outside. It's just been a ton of negative energy, and it's been very hard for me to kind of work through. So with that in mind, I had all of that going on, but I decided that I was going to try to essentially make the best of it and go right at the park. And so I went for a walk to the park, and I didn't even really make it very far before my mood changed, before I started feeling suicidal, which was very intense and very unfortunate and frustrating. Um, and my mood literally just like changed as I started thinking of as all of these images and ideas of what I'd been experiencing over the past week were just evoked by people, by cars, by the city itself, just the negative stimuli. I've been thinking a lot in terms of how consumerism runs rampant. I've been thinking in terms of the misery that I see in people, the destitution, as well as many other concepts and ideas, as well as my own internal struggles, and just thinking about the state of the world, my place in the world, feeling dislocated and alienated. And so, yes, so in the end, I felt suicidal. And so I reached out to my mother. I tried to be strong, um, and I basically said something on the lines of how I feel I feel like certain agents in society control me, and they suppress me, and I feel like they lash out at me. And one of the agents that I mentioned was my family. My mom took this personally, unfortunately, which made the conversation hard and harder to have, um, because she asked how has family insulted me and made my life hard. And I told her it was just the very fact that they created me, the very fact that they put me into existence, brought me into existence. My mom said proudly that she didn't regret it, that I was the best thing that ever happened to her, but that actually made me feel worse. And so I started quoting Nietzsche and talking about Nietzsche and saying you have to be hard like a diamond, saying essentially that compassion has made us weak. Compassion is a form of weakness, so that's in line with Nietzsche's idea of the slave morality, for instance, and just how I kind of want to feed on the hate. And that was not the best way to end the conversation, but that's how I ended it, unfortunately, because then my mother was checked out and she had to go. As a side note, I don't blame my mother for any of these things. These are because these are intense feelings, and I basically don't expect her to solve all of my problems. But it just made me sad that she wasn't more present and aware. Um, but that's why I resorted to Nietzsche, because I was just like, this is basically this is what keeps me going, thinking of Nietzsche's strength, what Nietzsche accomplished with his brilliant and beautiful body of work, and that keeps me going. In self-control, they make you formulate, in order to have self-control, they advise you to make if-then statements. And so I made an if-then statement that was basically, if I'm feeling down, then I'm going to head home. So I basically ended up writing a poem after this heated conversation with my mom through text, and I was feeling down, and so if I was feeling down, then that means I head home. And so because I was feeling down, I headed home, and I went back home because I knew that I could, and I kept that in mind the whole time. I was just like, I need to get home. I need to get home. If I feel this way, I head home. That was my resolve. That was my decision. So no matter what the distractions were, and there were a few distractions, like one person almost ran over me, and I just yelled at them to just fucking run over me already, and so it was self-destructive and suicidal behavior, but I was doing what I could to get through it. So eventually I got home, and I struggled at home, but I promised that I was going to battle it out. I promised that was my resolve, that I was going to battle it out, and that I was going to figure it out, that I had to figure it out, and that I had to get out of my mind, that I had to get out of my self-destructive pattern. And lo and behold, my unconscious mind came up with this idea to read something soothing, and it chose Viktor Frankl, of all people, who's perfect with his idea of the will to meaning. Part of what got me off my suicidal thoughts was when I realized, hey, Viktor Frankl basically went through a concentration camp, and yet he lived and he did amazing things. And so that was why I wanted to read Viktor Frankl, or at least part of Viktor Frankl's book again, because it reminded me of that. So this thought just came out of nowhere as I was struggling through these things and struggling through these thoughts and trying to figure this stuff out. And I thought of Frankl, and I started reading some of Frankl, and the most important idea that I picked up out of the little segments that I read about his logotherapy and his practice of logotherapy is his idea of meaning, and how man must be the completion of his own meaning, and that is why he must not be suicidal. Man must be the completion of his own project, sort of like the existentialist, except it's not a demand, it's more of an essential quality that we all have, that we all have a certain meaning that we must find, but that we also must complete, and that we do complete by living. And that immediately immediately brought me away from devaluing my life and devaluing who I am as a person because of my feelings of invisibility and inferiority and the like, by all of the stimuli that was being hurled at me over this past week, as well as my own way in which I talk down about myself and talk bad about myself in my mind because of my negative thoughts that I try to avoid, but that are very difficult to avoid. So yes, so basically the reason why I'm describing this is because I wanted to express my way of rationalizing my way out of suicide, the way in which I was able to realize the value of life, no matter how hard it was, and how it was a process, but how I was able to do it, and how this is what it's like to live with a mental illness, but you find subtle ways. I certainly was not going to call the crisis line, or any crisis line for any suicidal hotline, because they in the past have always actually made it worse for me, and so I definitely didn't do that, and so that was another thing that I had to battle. I literally had to do this alone, but I did do it alone, and that fills me with hope, and that fills me with a newfound feeling of responsibility, and it makes me happy. This is Phoenix, and thanks.